Today my story is about the Hinterkaifeck murders. 6 people were brutally murdered by an intruder that has been hiding in their house for the past several days. This intruder has been observing the family's routines and habits. He had a mattock that he had stolen from the barn. He had a plan, a motive, and a thirst for blood. He waited until the family was asleep. He then crept down the stairs and went towards the barn. He knew that the father, Andreas, would be going down to the barn to feed the animals. So the murder took place around 9 to 3 in the morning. He also knew that his wife, Cäzilia, and his daughter, Viktoria, would be there as well. Follow him shortly after. He ambushed them one by one, striking them with a mattock on their heads. He did not care if they screamed or begged for mercy. He would just keep hitting them until they stopped moving. He then went back to the house and found their youngest grandson, Josef, who was sleeping in his bassinet, and killed him. He then moved to the chamber where he found the new maid, Maria, who had arrived that day. Mind you, it was her first day, and she was the last to die. Trigger warning: this story contains graphic description of violence, murder, and gore. It also involves children and animals as victims, so if you're sensitive to this kind of topic, please watch this video with caution or skip this video. So on April 4th, 1922, the neighbors and their relatives also became very suspicious because no one was taking care of the animals. The animals were making a noise. They were making sounds and noises, obviously, because they're hungry. And not just that, they also noticed that their posts were literally piling up for the past 4 days. Also, the smoke stopped coming out of their chimney. Mind you guys, it's really cold. Around March time, it's really cold, so why isn't any smoke coming out of the chimney? So the neighbors were a bit alarmed, and they were also concerned. They were like, okay, what's going on? Like, we need to go in there and investigate and just see what's going on. But since the animals were making noises in the barn, what the neighbors did and the relatives, what they did, they end up going inside the barn, and inside there they end up finding 3 dead bodies. They alerted the police, and they were also alerting the neighbors, and they were like literally telling them, they were like, close your doors and windows because there's a murderer on the loose, so you want to be safe. Like, everyone was scared. They were thinking, they were like, what on earth is going on? So a little backstory about Andreas Gruber and Cäzilia Gruber. They were both born and raised in the same village, Kaifeck. Cäzilia was 9 years older than Andreas, and they got married when Andreas was 19 years old and Cäzilia was 28 years old in the year 1878. They had 7 kids. Out of 7 of them, only 2 survived, who was Viktoria. Viktoria had a husband called Gabriel. He was a farmer and a soldier. They both had a child, and she named the child after her mother, Cäzilia Gabriel, who was born in 1915, and she was 7 years old. Her father was a farmer and a soldier, but yeah, apparently it was told that he died in World War I, but his body was never found, and I will mention it in a bit why I've added this information, because it is a bit important. In that time, farming was very common, and people would not look down on you just for doing farming. Like, it was actually very normal. But the reason why other people would actually judge this family is because they were very stingy. They would always fight and argue, more like quarrelsome. They were also quite secretive, and they also had a very bad reputation, especially Cäzilia, because of her husband Andreas, because he was extremely abusive and he would also cheat on her all the time. And because of that, they both had a bad reputation, especially Cäzilia, because people would often laugh at her. Whether it was behind her back or front of her, people would often mock her. Now, since Viktoria was single, there was other people that liked her as well, including her father. Viktoria and her father, Andreas, had an incestuous relationship, which means that they also had a son called Josef, which was obviously Andrews' son, turned out to be Andrew's son. Now here I actually feel very sad for the mother, because imagine being in an abusive marriage, and in that marriage where you're being tortured, where you're being, ridiculed and mocked and seen as a clown just for simply being with a man. And because imagine seeing your daughter with your husband who is sleeping with him and having a baby with him. She had a very difficult and unhappy marriage. A man who would beat her often, who would cheat on her, who was extremely abusive and very stingy as well. He would often cheat with her with other women, but this time I feel like he crossed the limit by cheating on her with their very own daughter. Imagine what kind of a person you have to be. Imagine actually doing that. That's disgusting. How could you even betray your mom like that? And not just that, she also had to endure the scandal and shame because of her husband and daughter has put her through, which has resulted in the birth of Josef, who turns out to be their son and grandson at the same time. Now obviously at that time she was charged with incest and was also fined by the court, as well as her daughter Viktoria and her husband Andreas. I actually feel bad for her because I feel like in that time there was no such thing called as divorce. So she probably felt like she was responsible for her husband and her daughter's sins and crimes. And I actually feel bad for her because I feel like she was betrayed so badly to a point she had no one to comfort her or support her. I feel like she really had no one. She was all alone and also very afraid and insecure as she lived in a remote and haunted farm with a violent and unfaithful husband. And I think she also probably felt very depressed about the fact that 5 of her kids literally died and 2 of them survived. It's actually kind of sad if you think about it, but unfortunately I feel like we will never know, as Cäzilia never really wrote down her feelings or testimonials about how she felt and how her kids made her feel. Her kid made her feel, her daughter. She may have also had other feelings. Her feelings and all that remains a mystery, just like her murder. So before that, there was her maid called Crescent Rieger, worked for Andrew and his family for 1 year. So she worked from 1920 to 1921, who was then replaced by their other maid, Maria Baumgartner. So strange noises was also coming from the attic, and she just found that very weird, and she was also scared because she believed that it was haunted. She also felt like a presence was watching her and was following her around in the farm while she was working, but she didn't say that it was very close. She would say like someone would be watching her from a distance. She later on said that the vibe about this farm was just off and she was not feeling it, and in fact she's glad that she left because it could have been her, like, instead of Maria. After the murder, the police were the first one to actually question Crescent about the whole murder, and she was like, yeah, I literally had no connection or no idea like what was even going on in that farm because I was really far away. And it turns out to be true that she was actually in another village or something with her family or something, but she honestly had no connections or whatsoever with the murder. So Crescent later on died at the age of 1941 and she was 63 years old. The name Hinterkaifeck refers to the farm where the murders took place, which was located about 70 kilometers away north of Munich, Germany. The farm was isolated from the nearest village and was surrounded by woods. It was owned by Andreas Gruber, a 63-year-old farmer, and his wife, Cäzilia, 72 years old. They lived with their widowed daughter, Viktoria, 35 years old, and their 2 grandchildren, Cäzilia, 7, and Josef, 2. Now, Andreas and Viktoria, obviously they did not get married as their relationship was father and daughter, which resulted in the birth of Josef. This type of relationship was really scandalous that caused them a lot of trouble and shame. They were charged with incest and they were also fined by the court. They also faced social ostracism and hostility from the neighbors and relatives. So before the murder even took place, the killer was actually watching them for several months, because Andreas would normally complain to his neighbors that he would often see footprints leading from the forest, but it would never go back while it was snowing. And not just that, he also found a newspaper that he did not buy or subscribe. So that is a bit suspicious, because if he did not buy the newspaper, or even subscribe to it. Where on earth did it come from? Where on earth are those footsteps coming from? The fact that it is literally coming from the forest, but there's no sign of them going back. So he did find that weird. He did tell his other neighbors, and they remember that this has been going on for 4 months, because they remember that Andreas did tell them once or something. They were like, he was like, hey, did you guys like come into my farm or something, because I saw your footprints? But he was like, if it was you, then like, can you let me know? So they were like, no, it wasn't us. We wouldn't come to your farm, and even if we did, you would have seen footprints of going back. Andreas also reported to his friends and family that the keys were missing. So he was looking for the keys, newspaper, and footsteps that came inside the house, the attic, but it never really left. So it shows that the killer has been following and stalking the family for a couple of months. The crime took place around 9 to 3 a.m. So the killer's first victim was Andreas Gruber. He was the first to be attacked in the barn. He had a star-shaped wound on the side of his face, and his cheekbones were protruding from his flesh. His skull was smashed and his brain was exposed. And his second victim was Cäzilia Gruber. Now, she came because she heard her husband making noise in the barn. She only came just to check up on him to see if he was okay. And she was the second person to be attacked in the barn. She had a circular shaped wound on the right side of her head near the ear. So since it was on her head and on the side, it was like literally like right there. Her skull was cracked and her brain was bleeding. She also had a defensive wound on her right arm, which shows that she really did try to fight this attacker, but unfortunately she couldn't do anything about it. The third person that was attacked in the barn was Viktoria Gabriel. She had a star-shaped wound on the left side of her head above her eye. Her skull was completely shattered and her brain was splattered. She also had a defensive wound on her left arm and a wound on her neck, possibly caused by strangulation. The fourth victim was 7-year-old Cäzilia Gabriel. Had a star-shaped wound on the back of her head near the crown. Her skull was fractured and her brain was completely damaged. She also had a defensive wound on her right hand and several tufts of her own hair. So it shows, I think the reason why she had her own hair is because the amount of pain that she was going through, I feel like she couldn't take it anymore, which caused her to pull out her own hair. She was the only one that survived the initial attack. She was alive for a few hours after the attack, but due to shock and loss of blood, she ends up passing away. Josef Gabriel was the first person to be attacked in the house and not in the barn, and he was attacked in his mother's bedroom while he was sleeping in his bassinet. So the killer struck him with a mattock. He had a star-shaped wound on the right side of his head near the temple, and his skull was crushed and the brain spilled. And unfortunately about Maria, she died the same way. Her killer struck her with a mattock, star-shaped wound on her head. Her skull was broken and her brain was exposed. Maria wasn't in Andrew Gruber's house at that time, so I think she came around 9 a.m. and as soon as she came in, I think she went straight to her bed, laid down, and then the killer came inside her room and then killed her, because when the neighbors actually found her, her body was still warm. All of them had been killed with a mattock, a tool that is similar to pickaxe. After killing the whole family, the killer apparently stayed in the farm for several days. So he was feeding the animals, he was eating their food, and the fire had been lit. The killer apparently also used the family's phone line, and then after using it, he also cut it. He actually cut the line. After doing the investigation, the police found out that the killer didn't do this for money, because they did have some jewelry and money left in the house, and the jewelry and the money was untouched. It's like robbery was not the motive. After that, the police launched a massive investigation, but they faced many difficulties because there was so many people that was coming in and out of the house. The evidence was scarce and inconclusive, and the witnesses were unreliable and contradictory. Over the years, many theories have come up and actually bringing up. They thought that it was either robbery, revenge, family feud, or a serial killer. So about the robbery theory, some people believe that the reason why the family was killed was because of robbery. But if you think about it, no one really stole anything. The house was untouched. There was the money, there was jewelry, like literally nothing was touched. It was all normal. However, this theory is contradicted because the killer did not take anything from the farm. And not just that, the killer also stayed there for several days, risking the court of being seen or caught. Also, the family was not very wealthy, so I don't think the robbery would even target a house like that where there's literally nothing, because at the end of the day they're farmers and I don't think there's much to it. Like, some of the people believes that the reason why the killer even killed the family is because of a grudge that it has towards this family and wanted to punish them for their sins and crimes. So they kill the family to satisfy their anger and hatred because of the fact that the family had so many enemies and rivals that was involved in some scandals and controversies such as the incest affair, land disputes and lawsuits, and etc. However, this theory is contradicted because normally when someone kills, they often leave some sort of message or some sort of evidence, but this time the killer literally left nothing, like nothing. No message, no sign of their identity or motive. And not just that, the fact that they also kill the innocent kids and the maid literally had nothing to do with the family's problems. So I don't really think that this was a revenge kill. Also, the revenge kill seems too extreme for that, so I don't think that was a revenge kill. And even if it was, they believe that it was one of Victoria's former lover who had a fight with Victoria's father about Josef. They were fighting over the fact who the father was. His name was Lorenz Schlittenbauer. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. Least but not the last, they also believe that this was a family feud. Some people believe that the killer was somehow connected to this family so that they could inherit the land and properties. Now, this theory is supported by the fact that this family had some of their relatives and associates who had an interest in the farm and that they had conflicts and disagreements with the family. So some people also believe that Carl's family may have killed Cäcilia's entire family because of custody. Now, if that was the fact, then why would they kill Cäcilia as well? Cäcilia was killed as well. She was 7 years old and she was killed. So I don't really think that is one of the reasons. But they also believe that since Carl's, remember I said that Carl's body was not found in World War I. So they believe that Carl probably returned and found his wife having another child, and they think that that's what pissed him off to a point he killed the entire family. But that's a bit too extreme. I don't think Carl would do something like that that would also hurt his little girl. I mean, he's a dad at the end of the day. I don't think he would do something like that. Now, Peter was also one of the suspects because he worked at the farm and he literally knew the inside and outside of this farm and he knew exactly where everything was. So people also believe that Peter probably killed the entire family, but it doesn't make sense. I mean, he is poorer than that family. So if he worked for that family, how come nothing was missing? How come everything was in its place? So obviously Peter is off the list. Some people believe that it was a serial killer who killed the entire family because, like I said, the killer literally had no motive or intention and just wanted to kill. They kill the family for their own pleasure or satisfaction. This theory is supported that the killer showed signs of sadism and cruelty, and the fact that they used a brutal and unusual weapon to kill the entire family. However, this theory is not supported as well because serial killers normally leaves something behind, like a signature or a pattern, because they want to show that, yes, I did that work. Normally, if you actually see some documentary about serial killers, you could see that they are quite proud of the work that they did. So they will often leave some sort of pattern or evidence or something to show that they are the one that actually killed. And not just that, the fact that this serial killer also ends up staying in that house for like several days, for like 2-3 days, shows that normally serial killers does not stay in a house for at least 2-3 days. They leave after the work is done immediately. So it does seem rare for a serial killer that the fact that he will stay behind, eat their food, just do their job, feed the animals, it doesn't make sense. But also at that time, there was a serial killer whose name was Paul Muller. Now, Paul Muller was a vagrant and a serial killer who had committed similar crime in other regions. So Paul Muller probably might be the suspect or something. I don't know. It was never really confirmed because obviously after World War II started, most of the evidence got scattered and the buildings burned, so obviously the evidence got burned as well with it, like while the buildings were burning. So in World War II, most of the evidence actually got destroyed, so this case was never really solved, and the mystery remains one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in German history. The farm was demolished in 1923 and a memorial was erected at the site. Some of the skulls were preserved for forensic analysis. Unfortunately, like I said, they were lost during World War II. The files of the case were destroyed in 1962 and now only some of the copies and notes remains. So guys, this is about it. Thank you so much for sticking around and I'll see you next time. Bye.